a microphone to you. We do have a couple of written applications, and if I could call Mr. Robin Harris, resident Macleay, to the microphone to address council for that 5-minute period. Thank you. So, Mr. Harris, just as a reminder, just state your name, suburb or organisation you represent, and you can begin when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Harris, Macleay Island. And I'm here to talk about the SMBI issues. Thank you, Madam Mayor, Council. Ten days ago, we took this document to the Deputy Premier and had some discussions with her about SMBI issues. And I'll tell you about the outcomes from that meeting shortly. SMBI is a dilemma for this council. It's a dilemma for the state which created it. The dilemma is that we have 4 beautiful islands, 43% of which are conservation land, 7,000 empty blocks which will one day be built upon, something like 7,500 people at the moment. Are we the jewel in the crown, as we're often called by politicians, along with Stradbroke, or are we going to be 23,000 disadvantaged people disconnected from mainland and mainland facilities? I've come to this rostrum more times than I can count, not very many times recently, trying to advocate for a future for SMBI. I've obviously not been very successful to date. We know that a future for SMBI must have good transport connections to the mainland. It's an absolute must. This council in 2011 received an integrated local transport plan that was, I don't know, in old money, 4 inches thick. And that was the result of several months of deliberation. Translink ferries were one thing that was recommended in there, that we should seek lower fares to encourage families to gain employment on the mainland. The mainland is basically the only place where people on the island can get employment. The Translink agreement that this council got with the LNP government was supposed to bring that encouragement to employment and growth. Unfortunately, in the last 5 years, islanders have seen the property values lower by about 50%. And that includes the last couple of years. The Translink agreement was supposed to help with our economic development and our property values. Clearly it's failed. This council adopted a resolution in 2011 to investigate alternative barges and other means of getting vehicles backwards and forwards to the islands. To the best of my knowledge, nothing has happened. We've seen no progress on that. We know from the Dropping Off the Edge report, which recently came to the press, that these islands are severely disadvantaged. And I don't need to go into that any too much, because expressing and articulating the degree of disadvantage on the islands is a double-edged sword. It might get us attention from the state government or even the federal government, but unfortunately it also deters developers and the people that want to come to the islands. And we need those working families. Sadly, it's possible to buy a block on the island for $30,000 and less. As a consequence, rents are very, very low, and we attract people who are dependent to a place where dependency cannot be coped with. So what do we need? We need state government help for a certain, and that's why we went to the Deputy Premier. We need to build a better, balanced and sustainable society. We need to improve employment and economic growth. And as I said, we need to attract working families. And more than anything, we need to have consistent planning. It gets me very annoyed, frankly, when we see governments come in for 3 years or 4 years, they do this, that and the other, they tinker with things and then they disappear into the ether, and then we have to go through the whole process again. So what we asked the Deputy Premier for was an authority similar to the Kangaroo Islands Authority, which sits directly under the South Australian Deputy Premier. It has the ability to plan and build island infrastructure on Kangaroo Island. Kangaroo Island suffers in not dissimilar ways to our own SMBI Islands, with transport issues and growing welfare issues. So we want to see the creation of that authority. We would like to have Council's support for that, because that authority would take a significant load off this Council in terms of the capital investment that is needed to build the islands and the infrastructure that is needed. We also want to see the commencement of a proper, prompt and conclusive transport review to include all aspects of transport by the state government. All of this work has been done in the past. It's all available. Not a lot has changed in terms of statistics and the costings behind all this. So we're asking for that. Whether it includes bridges, barges, passenger ferries, aeroplanes, overhead rail, I don't care. But as long as we get a definitive answer within a very short time and actually start some proper planning. The other thing we've asked for is the integration of any developments on SMBI with the Wynham Creek PDA. SMBI infrastructure is poor in itself. Wynham Creek has not yet been solved. This council has not yet solved the Wynham Creek issues. It has not yet solved the issues of parking, partly created because of the lack of economic or barge transport, but the issues of parking on the islands. The other day, at 10:30 in the morning, I went to catch a ferry on Macleay Island. I counted over 60 cars parked on one area, well, several areas actually, but one combined area of private land. 60 cars parking on private land on Macleay Island. It's unconscionable. It shouldn't be happening. The Macleay Island jetty area should have been completed years ago. It still hasn't started. So something has to be done about that.
Mr Harris, just a reminder that
Thank
you're
you.
up to about 7 minutes, so thank you.
Okay. The other thing we wanted to see was the existing Translink ferry service reviewed. The Deputy Premier undertook to visit SMBI in spring, and we welcome that, because we welcome the opportunity to have further discussions with the state government. She also undertook to review the Translink and SMBI deal, both the levy and the zoning. She told us that a full, fair review would be undertaken regarding Translink, that it had not been officially announced at this point, and we were asked to make recommendations to that fair review. So I would suggest that it would be both logical and prudent to set aside any current proposals which you may have negotiated between Council and what was probably the LMP-guided Translink regime. And I would urge you to make submissions which reflect SMBI needs, and I'm sure you know what they are. I'm not sure our councillor does. And then I'd suggest that you await the new government's approach following the review of the LNP's transport policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Harris. Next speaker is Mr Clem Ebber, if you'd like to approach the microphone. Thank you, Mr Ebber, and just a reminder, state your name and suburb organisation you represent, and please begin when you're ready.
Yeah, my name is Clem Ebber. I'm a retired architect living on Lamb Island since 13 years, and I'm the chairperson of the Moreton Bay Combined Islands Association, short MBCIA. It is now about 1 year ago when I stood before you addressing the Council with regards to a possible road or bridge link from the mainland to the Southern Moreton Bay Islands. As chairperson on the MBCIA, I wish to address you today on the TransLink levy of $88 designed as a trial only until the end of this year, 31st of December. SMBI property owners regard this levy as unfair because it is not imposed on mainland ratepayers, although they are using the same TransLink system already for years. It's just a few days ago that I was part of a delegation of the SMBI Forum, and we discussed issues with the Deputy Premier and Minister for Transport and Infrastructure and her Director Generals. We urged her inter alia to abolish the TransLink levy altogether. We pointed out that in our view the levy is unfair and discriminatory, as SMBI ratepayers are paying much higher rates already than their mainland counterparts. Robin mentioned already the latest dropping of the EDGE report. I don't want to go into that, but the main outcome of this report is in view of the socio-economic ranking, the Bay Islands are being regarded as one of Queensland's most disadvantaged communities. From the fact that according to today's agenda 16, the funding agreement for the ferry operation to SMBI, in particular ratepayers of SMBI, that is not discussed in public, it appears that a new TransLink deal, the continuation of the aforementioned levy, has already been negotiated with the Department of Transport, and it seems to be a foregone conclusion. I would, in addition to this discriminatory TransLink levy of $88, the existing TransLink BITS ferry system is no longer working and cannot cope with the ever-increasing demand. Commuters are being left behind because the ferries are totally overcrowded in peak hours. That is why we have invited the Deputy Premier, Jackie Tradd, to see for herself how bad the situation is on the SMBI Islands, and the situation deteriorates by the day. She has promised us to visit the islands in coming spring. Running more ferries at shorter intervals is resulting in BITS having to acquire at least double the amount of ferries they are currently running, which inevitably will result in much higher fares. Not only will more ferries put a huge strain on all existing embarking and disembarking facilities on the island and on the mainland, more ferries will also destroy our unique marine environment and increase the danger to marine wildlife. The ancient vehicular ferries are totally outdated and need to be replaced rather sooner than later. They are only running infrequently and have limited space. Therefore, spaces are often not available when SMBI residents need to travel to the mainland unexpectedly. In addition, not all barges serve all the islands. Fares are already now exorbitant and prohibitive for SMBI residents and mainland residents alike. Freight costs to SMBI are excessive, resulting in exceptionally high prices for all aspects of life. Ferry and barge companies that are BITS and Stradbroke ferries are one and the same company enjoying a monopoly, despite their different names. Stradbroke ferries are not regulated and they are charging SMBI residents at their will. During the last 13 years, SMBI residents encountered a price hike for the barges of 243%. while the national inflation rate did not exceed 42.1% during the same period. Water-based transport as the main means to and from the islands is no longer an option. The current transportation system is totally out of date and cannot cope with the future demand. Visitors for the islands have to drive around for more than half an hour at Wynham Creek to find a parking spot, distances away from the ferry terminal. Ferry passengers are slashed with exorbitant fines when they return and happen to overstay their parking time for no fault of their own, but for the lack of adequate parking. We can only hope that the revised PDA scheme for Wynham Creek will provide significant more spaces than provided in the current scheme. The new development at Wynham Creek might transform the area into a world-class waterfront precinct, as our mayor announced recently, but Wynham Creek will continue to be the gateway to SMBI with their third world conditions, as stated in the dropping of the edge report only a couple of weeks ago. If transport and infrastructure on SMBI are not improved rather sooner than later, the islands are going to deteriorate even further, while SMBI property owners are being hit with ever-increasing charges. In view of Section 16 of today's agenda, I ask you all not to accept a new TransLink levy of $88 when the trial period ends on the 31st of December this year. They suffer already enough. We, the ratepayers of the Southern Moreton Bay Islands, deserve to be treated the same way as our fellow mainland citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ebber.